Dr. Jazz.
Here we are. Thanks for finding
Yeah,
the time.
man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have you on so many records, and I've done these talks with Ben and Steve and all these guys you play with. So I was like, shit, I have to drop you a line, and let's see, maybe we find the period when we can do it. So,
Yeah.
um, I I want to start with asking you first, like, what's happening on the band leading department? That's my uh, first question. The last one I heard was the Glenn Close one, and the Life with Disease, and obviously the collective with Ben and Steve, which I want to dig into also. But like, still, like, are you doing something like specifically under your own name lately, or?
Actually, I've been focusing a lot on the trio with
Hmm.
Ben Allison and Steve Cardenas. It's something I get so much joy from, and also just uh, a lot of creative satisfaction. And I
Mm.
kind of feel like, regardless of the fact that it's a trio and we call ourselves Allison, Cardenas, and Nash, it still feels like, I think, to each of us, like it's our personal project.
Mm.
So if someone says, "Oh, do you have a recent recording of your own?" I would probably refer to our trio recordings because it feels that personal to me. Um, and then, I did a holiday big band record.
Yeah, I heard
Yeah, and that was a big band project. I think some of the big kind of big band projects and stuff like that, I really enjoy um, for a lot of reasons. But I also really love the intimacy of the trio record, and I'm very satisfied. Yeah, to be honest, with that trio
Oh,
representing
it's beautiful. Yeah.
them and how I'm feeling. So yeah. And I'm involved with a recording right now. We're in the middle of a recording. It's not mine, but I've gotten involved with some of the arranging and producing. But it's by a singer named Kristen Lee Sargent, who is the
Hmm.
singer on the big band Holiday record. She wrote a bunch of original music, and it's beautiful, and it's more in the line of sort of folk and pop mixed
Mm.
with jazz.
Nice.
And Michael Lenhart, who's like a
Hmm.
producer with Steely Dan, he's producing it, and we have incredible musicians on it. So that's exciting because that's happening right now, and
Fantastic.
it feels like the most fresh thing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your trio with Ben and Steve. I know with Ben you go way back, like mid '90s, I guess. And Steve, I don't know, probably you're also around that time. How did you guys decide to do the trio? And I know you did the Carla Bley record, and then the Herbie Nichols, which you have like a really long association with, also his music, and one of the greats, I think, most underrated greats.
Yeah.
How did you guys decide to do the trio also, and without drums, which is so nice?
Yes, people point out the fact that we don't have drums, and it always feels like, oh, kind of a surprise because it seems very natural to me.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to have drums. You don't have to have anything. You could be whatever combination you want. But historically, Ben Allison and I have worked together since maybe 1990 or
Yeah.
91. So we have like almost a 35-year history. And a lot of that has to do with the Jazz Composers Collective, which we formed in the early mid 90s. And we continue to do that for 13 years with Frank Kimbrough and other great
Yeah.
musicians. And he also had another separate band with Steve, his own band. And Steve and I had never played together. And we had a
Mm.
festival at the Jazz Standard quite a few years ago, probably in the late aughts of 2000s. And we had all sorts of different bands over a period of a week, and Ben was there with Steve, and I was there with Ben in another band, and Steve and I just kind of met. And then Ben really loved the music of Jimmy Jufrey and Jim
Hmm.
Hall, those kind of really those drummerless trios. And Steve Cardenas naturally is a huge Jim Hall fan. And we got called to do a gig, and we said, let's just do that music from like Jim Hall music, Jimmy Jufrey. Let's just explore what that's like with this trio. And we had such a great time doing it that we went into the studio and recorded our first record not long after that. And over the last few years with the recordings and some tours that we've done in Europe and in South America and Cuba and different places, we've come to realize that it's something that we all feel that is very important to us. And
Mm,
so as I move away from a lot of touring, I've left the Jazz and Lincoln Center Orchestra recently.
mm,
This is probably the band that I would want to tour with, and probably not many other bands at this point.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, how come you guys decide, I mean, what will be the next one? I'll put it like that. You know, you did Carlos tunes, you did Herbie Nichols, and
Yeah.
what's the next feature?
Well, it's funny because historically it's always been some kind of tribute record,
Yeah.
right? We use the opportunity to record and play and do tributes to people that we have so much respect for, or music we really love. And this time we're going to go into the studio in late June and record our next record. And it's the first time we're going to record all original music. It's
Oh,
going to be
beautiful, man. Fantastic.
all stuff that we've recorded, that we've composed. But some of them are things that we've recorded in other circumstances and contexts, and then we're also writing new music. So it's going to be a combination of, for me, two things that I've never recorded and something I just wrote for this, and something that was recorded a long time ago.
Mm,
And it's kind of the same for Ben and Steve, exploring some older music that was performed in different instrumentation groups, and thinking how we can pare it down to the trio and re-explore
yeah.
some of those tunes. So I'm really, really excited to get back into the studio with them. It's like it means so much to me.
Mm,
So yeah, I don't know when that will come out, but it won't take long, maybe later in the year or early next year. We have to
beautiful.
figure it out.
I wanted to ask you about Herbie Nichols also. You know, I talked with Ben Allison about that also, but what is it about his music that you guys decided to kind of so much dig into it, like already in what, late 90s or even before? I mean, obviously he's people who love jazz, like, or us who investigate this and, really dig this music. Kind of we stumble upon this and we love it. But for general listeners, I think it's like quite not really justifiably, but quite unknown. Like, what was it about him that you guys really liked, or especially you? I mean,
Well, his music is incredible. His compositions are, I think they can be compared to Thelonious Monk in terms of the
yeah,
quirkiness
yeah,
and the clarity and the really individual style that he's created. I would say that's sort of the closest comparison that I would make, but he's definitely his own artist. And
yeah,
Frank Kimbrough had a lot to do with that. Frank Kimbrough is a pianist and composer
sure.
who I've worked with since the 80s. Then he passed away like 3 years ago, and he's the one who brought Herbie Nichols' music to my attention and to Ben
Mm,
Allison's attention, and we started transcribing Ben and well, Frank did most of it, transcribed a lot of the music from the record. So we had it pretty much everything that he had recorded. There were 3 records. There was some stuff at the Library of Congress, and Ron Horton, the trumpet player,
yeah,
also involved with the Jazz Composers Collective, went down there, and then they don't allow you to photocopy stuff, so he was like getting scores in the hand, you know, copying them onto paper. He brought some stuff back. And so we had really a nice collection of music and did several records of his music. And we kind of let that go. I mean, the collective sort of ended our residency, and everyone went off to do their own thing, and we
yeah,
kind of stopped really dealing with Herbie Nichols' music. But a funny thing happened, and there's been this long, existing sort of mythological rumor about a big box of his compositions, like over 100 compositions that were lost in a flood.
mm,
And Roswell Rudd and some other people were investigating like how to try to get more information about this, and we really couldn't. So there was always thing in the back of our head about the absolute shame of all this music that never had been recorded or played. And so I'm I'm about ready to go on for a concert at Jazz Lincoln Center at Rose Hall. And Billy Banks, who's like our stage manager, uh, he came up to me and goes, "Hey man, I got a call from this guy named Lawrence, and he said that he's the nephew of Herbie Nichols,
Oh,
and he has a whole bunch of his stuff. And I was like, give me that. So I had this phone number and called him up. And he was kind of hard to reach. He didn't have a cell. I mean, this was like in the beginning of cell phones, but he didn't have one, and he didn't really have an email address. So I had to catch him at work, and so it was like this kind of thing. And he goes, "Yeah, I got a whole box full of stuff. It's got his compositions and poetry by him and some other things." I said, "My God, I think this is the treasure trove that got away." And so we arranged to meet with him, and he photocopied uh, you know, dozens and dozens of original uh, compositions by Herbie Nichols. And so we got together as a group with Frank Kimbrough and Ron Horton and Ben Allison and stuff, and we started going through them and reading through them. And a lot of them, a lot of stuff that you needed to say register as a copyright with the Library of Congress, you didn't have to have chord changes on it. You just had to submit a melody. So a lot of the stuff was copywritten, but there wasn't a lot of information on it,
mm,
like tempos or feel or chord changes. So a lot of them were just like melodies. So in some cases, we said, "Boy, this is beautiful," and we put some chord changes in there, but most of them had chord changes. And we started playing through them when we did a concert at the Jazz Standard in New York. And we presented all this music that had never been recorded by Herbie and never been heard before. And so that is, I mean, just so exciting to be able to discover the music and be
yeah,
able to play it. And some other people have also gotten hold of that music, and like Don Sickler,
mhm.
he's a he's a publisher and also a trumpet player and
Yeah.
musician who put out a record of it. But we invited the nephews, or two of them, and they came to some rehearsals with us, and we talked about recording a lot of this music as a trio, and they really were supportive of it. And that last record we did was all
Mm,
the unrecorded, unheard music of Herbie Nichols. Very
right.
special project, and we play a lot of that when we tour.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, fantastic, man.
yeah.
Yeah, beautiful story. Uh,
Um,
Ted, you said you will next one you will record original music. You know, I love your compositions. There's a lot of humor there and beautiful melodies, and I love the titles also. Like always, uh, you know, like burnt. What is that one? Burnt avocado and toast,
oh
and
yeah.
the creep and all those. I listened to that record today. And
Yeah.
what's your process when composing? I mean, how do you usually start with a melody on saxophone, or it changes, or it varies, or
God, it's such a great question. And it's also like a very deep question for me right
Mhm.
now from you, because I'm going to begin teaching a composition course at Temple University starting in the
Mm,
fall. And composition, the different approaches to it or what it means to me, what gives me inspiration is deeply personal. And it's something that I think with a lot of people who compose their own music, they find their own path, they find their inspiration, and it's hard to say, here's how to compose music, right?
yeah,
So, but it's an important question, and it's an important thing to be able to talk about and teach. So I'm exploring this a little bit kind of in my mind as I'm thinking about this course that I will teach. But I have so many different approaches to music, and I think that when I first started composing, it's sort of like if I think about the music that I first started to listen to and was really inspired by, the bebop
mm,
music of the 40s and going into the 50s. And you could say, yeah, Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and Sonny Rollins, they're all composers, but they were more or less, there were a lot of contrafacts, which are
yeah,
like using other sets of chord changes, right? Standard tunes, blueses, I got rhythms, ditties that sort of just create little chord structures that they basically just want to improvise on. It was almost like creating an excuse to improvise on. And a lot of the compositions from that time had character, certainly, and people continue to play them and they're great compositions. But for me, it felt like as jazz musicians like Chick Corea and Wayne Shorter and people
yeah,
like
yeah,
that started
yeah,
to really explore how the compositions were not only vehicles for improvisation, but helped create an identity for them, like a continuation of who they are as improvisers, and deep thinkers musically, but this body of work that are original compositions that kind of create who they are in a
yeah,
lot of ways. And my first approach was more like the latter, where I was just creating things to play on, and would sort of write like melodies and chords at the same time and try to come up with hip combinations and stuff. And it's, it for me it was like hit or miss. Like sometimes the composition would be good, and sometimes it was like whatever, kind of sad. And I think it's because I didn't really have necessarily an approach to it. It was just sort of like sitting at the piano and trying to come up with a hip combination of chords
Mm.
and notes. So for me, um, I feel like my compositions are more successful when I use really specific inspiration and imagination for things. Like, well, you mentioned the Creep record. That's a record I did. It's sort of like an Ornette Coleman style, like pianoless quartet
Mhm.
with
Yeah,
trumpet and sax.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the reason why I wrote some of that music was because there was a filmmaker that I met. And although the film never came out, it was in 5 parts, uh, basically based loosely on different jazz musicians from the 60s. One of the characters was loosely based on Ornette Coleman. And
Mm.
this director, writer, he asked me if I would play the lead role and be this kind of avant-garde alto jazz saxophonist. And so I wrote these pieces of music for that film. And originally it was Marcus Printup on trumpet, and we had Paul Sakivi and Ulysses Owens, and we did a look like a club version of this where we played in a jazz club, and it was really pushing the envelope. But I wrote that music really inspired by Ornette Coleman and by that style of music. And I loved so much what came out of that.
Mm.
I don't think I would have written that music had I not had that project, that I continued to write more music with that in mind, with sort of the freedom and sort of openness
Yeah.
and the quirkiness. And so it led to also some quirky titles. Um, but a lot of the music that I have composed are bigger projects like suites that are inspired by very specific things like political
Yeah,
speeches
yeah. I wanted to ask you about that one. Yeah. How come?
and yeah,
Yeah.
and artwork,
Yeah.
paintings, or a concept like transformation, something that I collaborated with Glenn Close.
Yeah.
So once you have this inspiration, it triggers areas in your brain that are different type of creativity that help, like for you to be able to express these things that you're feeling and that you're thinking is different than just sitting down and playing some hip little chords or something at the piano. It's like you really want to express something that you're deeply feeling, um, and that puts you in a different space. And I would say that I try to hear something and find it. That's more
Mm.
successful than if I just mess around and then accept, oh, that sounds good. I like both. I like sometimes starting with a melody. I could play it on a saxophone, or I could try to hear it and write it down, or play it on the piano. Sometimes I'll start with a chord structure. Sometimes I'll start with a groove and a bass line, something that sets up a certain kind of feeling, and then I'll start to add on top of that, like a sculptor who, is adding
Yeah.
material and then creating something. Sometimes I like to think of it like a sculptor who takes a block of marble and then chips away at it and then leaves behind what's there. And I think that everything is possible at any time musically. So it's like
Yeah.
what we remove and we get rid of, and we are left with this thing. I mean, that probably doesn't apply so directly, but it kind of is a feeling I have about composing. So there's all sorts of different ways that I approach it, but mainly for me, it's more moving when it comes from a place of inspiration.
Yeah, yeah. Is it easier for you knowing who you compose to? I mean, now you have Ben whose sound is and playing very specific how he plays, the bass, and Steve Cardenas obviously also like it would be
Yeah.
different if you play, I don't know, if you had John Scofield in the band or whoever, Bill Frisell, like does this help you knowing that it's Steve and Ben there or
Well, that's interesting because up to now, I've not really composed anything specifically for the trio. So,
yeah.
um, but uh, the one composition that I just created like a month ago, uh, I was thinking of them a lot,
Mm,
and I was thinking about how they play, because certainly you can imagine how this is going to sound with certain musicians playing it, and it's like that with a big band too. You know
mm,
who's going to play a plunger trumpet solo and have a certain kind of feeling, and who's going to sound really great on the clarinet, or what kind of effects can we get out of the bass with this particular player. And so when I composed this music, I knew that it ended up being sort of a combination of things. I did a concert of Bill Evans' music at Dizzy's recently with a big band, all big band
Oh, well,
charts that I wrote based on Bill Evans. And I just became so obsessed with Time Remembered. His it's just so deeply moving. And I started to just listen to it and think about it and kind of analyze it, because there's a cadence to it, but it's not typical cadence. Like you don't have 5/1s.
yeah.
You have almost no typical kind of European cadence. It moves from minor chord to minor chord, or major chord, or it just keeps moving around. It carries you forward, but it doesn't have typical cadence. And I was fascinated by that, because I've often used typical cadences to resolve and
Mhm.
stuff like that. But it's like when you recognize certain areas that you're maybe feeling lacking, like how can I achieve that same type of momentum without typical cadence? I hear other people doing it. So that was one of my objectives, was to write a piece for Ben and Steve and me that would be sort of influenced by Bill Evans in
Mhm.
that way, that it would move in that way. But I also can hear, because both of them love Bill Evans and Jim
Yeah.
Hall, and that kind of space and that sort of feeling of it. So it really came together because of them, and also because of certain things I was feeling at the time.
Yeah. It helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it also helps. I mean, knowing who the horn
Yeah.
player will be,
Yeah. You can hear it.
yeah, I mean, if I play with Tony Malaby, like I know how he plays, or when I played with McCaslin, Donnie, I would not use the same material because they are completely different player. Or if I played with you, like
Yep.
it's like, shit, you're really good at this stuff, so I'm gonna use that. I mean, uh,
Yeah. No,
I
it's
think
really
that's a good thing,
cool.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
yeah. I wanted to ask you, you come from the West Coast, right?
Hmm.
When did you move to New York, and how come you decided to move to New York? Because you were already playing on the West Coast basically quite a lot, right?
Yeah. By the time I was 18, I was already a professional musician.
Well,
I did some gigs like when I was 16 and 17 that were really great. Like well, I went to my first actual professional gig was with Lionel Hampton, and we went to Hawaii, and I was 16.
oh wow, man.
Yeah, I had to take a week off from high school, to go and do that. So that was kind of wild. And then that summer, I auditioned for Quincy Jones and got the gig to play lead alto for this big summer tour, 5 weeks.
Wow.
Um, we rehearsed for a couple of weeks, and we were getting close to leaving. And then they got they went around to get everybody's information for the taxes and all that kind of stuff. And they said, "Wait, you're 16 years old." I said, "Yeah." And they said, "There are child labor laws. I mean, you have to have a tutor or a guardian come out with you, right?" I said, "Well, what can we do?" And, well, let's look into hiring a guardian to go on the road with you. It was going to be twice what I was being paid to pay that person. So that wasn't good. And then Quincy Jones suggested that he would adopt me temporarily and then be my guardian. But the lawyers were like, that's just too much trouble. It'd be so much easier just to get somebody else. And that's what they did. They just replaced me. But then I did Toshiko Akiyoshi's band and Louis Belson's big band and some other
Wow.
bands like that when I was 17. And I graduated high school. And then it came that decision of like, all right, what's next? College, And in the late 70s, there were some really good music schools, not nearly as many as there are now for jazz, but I really love jazz music. And even though my father and my uncle were very, very busy studio musicians with great careers, everybody said, if you just stay in LA and just start taking calls, you're going to be a busy studio musician and make a lot of money and do all sorts of great stuff. And I was, maybe the naivete of being young and also having dreams and goals and whatever. I started getting calls for record dates and things. Like I'd be sitting in these sections with Jerry Hay and all these guys were doing all these like record dates. I was like, um, and they were like, man, just wait, it's just going to keep happening. And then I was like, no, I got to go to New York, man. No, with school, I want to play. And so a lot of my heroes, jazz heroes, were in New York. I mean, George Coleman, Bob Berg, Mike Brecker, all these people that I was checking out, and they're all in New York. So I just moved to New York. 18, no school,
Wow.
just hit the
Oh
scene
man.
there, like, hey, I'm here, let's go. And they were like, get in that big line over there, you got some stuff to learn. And they were right. I mean, I was young. But so that's when I moved to New York, 18,
Wow. Already.
and I've just stayed. I've been there ever since.
What were the first gigs that you got in New York? Because like you said, what early 70s, mid 80s, that's like, all these amazing players and the older generation basically still alive also, many of them, and the new guys, I mean, Brecker, Mincer, all these monster players. Like, how did you get gigs, and who were the kind of the guys that first called you?
Well, there was a couple ways. One was that I had a list. When people found out that I was moving to New York, all these Los Angeles musicians, a lot of them had come from New York. Some of them were like, say, in the Tonight Show band in New York,
Oh
and
yeah.
then it moved to LA, like Dick Spencer and all these different people who had moved with the show. And they're like, man, when you get to New York, call this person, call Lou Marini, call Lou Delgado,
Mm.
call Bobby Rosengard. He was the drummer for the Dick Cavett show. You call this person, call this person. So I just went down a list of like almost 60 people and just called them. And a lot of them returned my calls. They were like, oh, great. Yeah, I know your pedigree, your father and your uncle and the great musicians. And so what are you doing? Oh, I just moved to New York. All right. Bobby Rosengard is an example. He's a big band drummer who did tons of studio work, but he also did a lot of what we call club dates, which are like events, private events and parties and stuff. So he was one of the first person to call me, just, yeah, come and do a club date out in Long Island.
Oh,
And then um, Chuck Israel, the
oh,
bass
yeah, yeah.
player,
Oh, really? Oh,
called him, and he says, "Oh, wow, well, that's great." He says, I have this little big band that plays, and we're doing some stuff, and why don't you come and I need somebody to play second alto on this gig. I was like, okay. So I showed up to the rehearsal, and Jerry Nywood was playing lead alto. Bob Mincer was playing tenor sax. Sal Nistico was playing tenor sax.
mm.
Joe Temperley was playing baritone. Jimmy Nepper was on the
Oh
trombone. Tom
man.
Carroll was in the trumpet section. Um, John Schofield was playing guitar. I mean, it was like the who's who of that loved Chuck and were in this band with him. And so I was like, oh my God. And so we did a series of gigs with this thing called the National Jazz Ensemble. Um, he he disbanded about a few months or so later, a year later, and moved to Washington to
Mm.
teach. So that band ended. But ironically, it was sort of the precursor to the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra because it was very much the same thing. It was largely based on repertory music at that time, but there was some original music, and it was a series, and he was getting funds from the government and trying to create a whole concert series. And so it was like the same basic idea, but just didn't have the weight behind it.
Mm.
But I learned so much about music from then. And my father, trombonist Dick Nash, was in the Tex Beneke band in the early 50s, and his roommate was Mel Lewis, the drummer.
Oh yeah.
So he was another person that I called when I got to New York. And Mel's so funny. He goes, "Yeah, come down to the club." And I went down to the club, the Vanguard, where the band was playing every Monday night. And I was looking around for Thad Jones, and he wasn't there. And then I went over to Mel's house, and he told me the whole story about how he and Thad Jones had just split up. So I moved there just at that time. And so I started subbing on the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. And then about 3 years after I moved to New York, I actually joined the band, and I was in
Oh,
that band for 9 years. And that was probably, up until into the 90s, my absolute most important association was playing with Mel.
and
Sitting,
everyone played in that band, right? Almost. I mean,
it's
like,
just, what's that?
I mean, like everyone played in that band. Like, I think from Lovano to, I mean, every horn player that went through that.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to imagine, here I am, I'm 21, whatever, and Joe Lovano's sitting on my right, and Dick Oates is sitting on my left for 9 years. And I mean, how can you not learn
Oh,
about how to play the saxophone with these two heavyweights? and they really became my two favorites. So and I play both alto and tenor, and I when I play alto, I couldn't help but to hear Dick Oates and the way he plays and the way he approaches and his passion and his fluidity and his language. And then with Lovano, when I play tenor, I couldn't help but to hear that sort of that sound and the way he would create his phrases and
Yeah.
his openness. And so it was like interesting because I felt a little schizo as I was playing my own music because I was so influenced by these two greats. Still am.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah, obviously. Yeah, yeah. Beautiful, man. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
what about band leading? I mean, how did that happen? I have you on so many records, the Palmetto stuff and from the mid 90s on. And but did you lead bands already in the 80s, or when did that happen more extensively for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has a band, you know what I mean? Everybody has some band and leads a band because I mean the exception would be people who are just
Yeah.
side people and don't ever want to have their own band or whatever. So, everyone's got a quartet or doing something. And I'm like that. I mean, I had a quartet in the mid to late 80s and had different musicians. And as I started to explore who I am musically, that band changed a little bit. It started off with Bruce Barth on piano
Hmm.
and Tim Horner on drums,
Oh, beautiful.
who very swinging. Bill Mooring was the bass player in my first quartet. He played with Count Basie and moved to New York, and I really liked his feel and his swing. And so I was really more interested in kind of swinging and playing like standards and writing some jazz tunes that were swinging and stuff like that, you know. And they were all such great swingers. Well, then Bruce canceled on a tour or something. The first tour that I had, and Frank Kimbrough came in. I hadn't met him before, and Bill
Okay.
called Frank. So Frank came into the band, and suddenly the band took another direction just because of Frank's incredible musicianship and his original music, and we started playing some of his tunes. And then Bill was replaced with Ben Allison. As we started to do gigs with Ben Allison and jam sessions and things, it was clear that Ben, his whole approach to music, just graduating from NYU, um, was like bringing a whole different energy and
Hmm.
creativity to the thing. So he joined the band, and every time somebody changed, like the band became sort of a new band, and that was late 80s into the
Already.
90s.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. You mentioned you've done so much work since then, and obviously the presidential suite, that was a big one for you. How did you decide to do that record? I mean, it's quite a while now ago, still 8 or 9 years ago, but or even longer, I think. Uh,
Yeah, I think maybe 8 years ago. Yeah, nine. Yeah, exactly.
that's quite a biggie, right? I mean, also like the size and the concept and everything. What was the
What was it?
decision process there?
Yeah, that recording is so important to me for a bunch of reasons. I mean, the process, the band, my own learning. It received a couple of Grammy Awards. So, I mean, that is a really important kind of milestone
Yeah.
for me. And and I have to say that I think a lot of that I can trace back to, well, first of all, I was given an opportunity by Jazz and Lincoln Center, Wynton Marsalis in particular, who said, look, please write a whole suite of music for the band and whatever it is, a theme that's important to you, something. And there was a point where I felt like, I'm sure we all go through this. A lot of people go through this. Is like questioning are the choices you're making, why maybe you're not as successful as you feel like you should be or want to be. You're not getting the gigs that you want. You're not headlining at jazz festivals. You're not whatever getting recording contracts and stuff
Sure.
like that. And you can be sort of like, well, that's because the scene is like this, or they want this kind of music, or this kind of people, or I mean, you can have all sorts of excuses, but really, what comes down to it, like, are you engaging people with your music? Because
Mm.
that's the main thing.
Yeah.
Most times, people who are successful have something that people want to hear or feel something from listening to or engaged by the experience of the music. And I think that was missing in my playing and or in my writing or whatever. And I had a meeting with somebody. He was well, he was originally a CFO at Jazz Lincoln Center, but he also ended up managing all sorts of great artists like Christian McBride and different people. And I said, "Hey, man, could we talk?" We met for lunch. I said, I don't know. What is your opinion about this stuff? I just don't feel like, I mean, I kind of explained what I just told you. And he says, well, he says, there's a thing about embracing your mythology. And I was like, well, what is that? I'm thinking of Greek myths and stuff. And he says, well, your personal mythology is who you are. Like it's how you grew up, where you grew up, what did your parents do? What's your background?
Mm.
Like your ancestors, what did you get exposed to as a child, and all of these things, what was important to your family. Um, that's your mythology. And if you're not bringing any of that to your music, your music isn't reflecting who you are. So maybe people have a hard time to relate in a certain way. It's, it was interesting because it seemed like, well, your music should just be good or bad. You just make good music and
Yeah.
that's it. So it's deeper than that. And I said, oh, okay. So when this project came and was presented to me, I wanted to try to embrace things that were deeply personal that would sort of reflect my mythology in a way. So I thought about my upbringing in Los Angeles, and my parents were both musicians, but they were also civil rights activists, very liberal. And so I grew up in a household that would have Black Panther meetings, and
Mm.
Charles Gary, the attorney, would come over and talk about a case, or all these things that I just took for granted. The wild parties, all the musicians that would come in and out, and how my parents, and particularly my mother, was very vocal and very active politically, and so I thought, well, maybe so embracing that side of my family and myself, of the politics, uh, and I started thinking, and I'd seen some things like Henry Hay and Hermeto Pasquale and different
Hmm.
people who had like used speeches, but for the intonation and for the pitches and done stuff with. Usually they'll maintain the original speech and then have music on top of it. You
Yeah.
can see a lot of versions of this online and stuff, but which I was intrigued with. But what I did is I listened to a lot of speeches, a lot of political speeches from people from all over the world. Obviously, I wanted to hear the speeches. I didn't want to just read them. So they had to be fairly recent because they had to be videotaped or recorded. Um, and I narrowed it down to the things that moved me the most. The speeches that moved me the most were political and were about human rights and freedom, civil rights, things like that. So this touches on this part of my mythology. So I
Mm.
transcribed all the speeches. I gave myself this incredibly challenging, process of writing every pitch for every word that was spoken. I've got notebooks full of just
Yeah. It's
Churchill,
so much work, man. Yeah.
Reagan, and FDR, and all these different people and their speeches, and just so I got all the notes, you know, and it's like, okay, now I have all the thematic material, I have all the melodies basically. So, and I picked speeches that weren't all like left wing, politicians. My goal wasn't to make it a political statement, but more or less embrace important speeches that had to do with freedom. So, like Reagan's
Reagan, yeah, for instance, yeah.
to Gorbachev, tear down this wall is one, and Churchill, who's also Republican or
Yeah.
more right wing, but talking about the war and talking about World War II and all that. Um, but they all moved me. They all created like a tear in my eye, like they had to have that was a requirement. And then I took all this material and I figured out how to contextualize it. Sometimes, like with Kennedy, it was the time, it was like early 60s, uh, the period, the kind of music, who he was. He seemed a bit macho to me, so I wanted it to
Mm.
have a certain gravitas, certain sort of macho quality to it. And I decided to make it a blues, so I had to fit this melody into a blues. Uh, things like that. Nehru comes from India, so I
Yeah,
create like kind of like a groove that's sort of modal and odd time signature, that kind of stuff. And it
that's
it was successful to me because it embraced those things that I was talking about, like my background, who I was. And so for me, it's a very important piece of music. And here we go. People did recognize it
yeah.
as being important because maybe I did touch on those things that my friend was telling me that I needed to do. So that's sort of interesting,
Hmm.
you know?
Interesting. How did you end up also on that gig with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra? I mean, you played with Mel Lewis's for what, 9 years, and then with the Lincoln Orchestra, you played like what, more than 25 years, right? Like, how did you get that gig? I mean, you were already really in the scene, I guess, mid 90s, or I don't know when you started playing, or late 90s, or
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are different scenes, right?
yeah,
So, and New York especially, you could be playing for years and not play with some great musician
absolutely.
that, has been gigging and busy, and you just don't connect because there's so many different scenes going on. And I would say with Wynton, I mean, he created his own scene.
Yeah.
Um, he and I are about the same age. I mean, I'm a year, maybe a year and a half old or something, year, something older. And but we have kids the same age. We have fathers who are musicians. We grew up at the same time, listening to the same kind of music. We're really very similar people in many ways, and we didn't really meet each other until, well, he was, had 9 Grammys, and I was out there still struggling to work, But um, yeah, so I left the Mel Lewis band a year after Mel died, and Lovano left around the same time. My reason was because I didn't want to play the alto sax anymore.
Okay.
I really wanted to focus on the tenor sax. If I felt more creative on it, I wouldn't say necessarily it was a stronger voice, but I felt like that, and I wanted it to be. So I focused that on more creative gigs being on tenor sax. Well, in 90, so maybe about 4 years after I left the Mel Lewis band, I got called to sub at the last minute to cover on lead alto on the Jazz Lincoln Center concert. And I was like, yeah, what's going on? They were like, yeah, could you come in and I hadn't worked with them yet. I didn't know the people. I didn't know the guy who called me was an executive director named Rob Gibson. And he knew of my work with Mel Lewis, knew I was an alto player. And he says, could you come in and sub? Frank West got sick. He was going to play lead alto. And it's the music of Jimmy Heath, and Joe Henderson is the guest. I'm like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to come and do that. And so I showed up, and on the alto, which I hadn't been playing a whole lot of, but I really felt this was an important thing to do
Sure.
musically, to be around those complete heavyweights. And I felt really insecure. I showed up, and there were musicians. I remember Victor Goines was actually playing second alto, and he was kind of vibing me because it was like, who is this guy? I don't know who this guy is. And he's like coming in at the last minute playing lead alto. And of course, I understand his vibe, but like those kind of things. I mean, there was like uh, Bob Stewart was playing tuba, and Marcus Belgrave from
Yeah.
Chicago, from Detroit. All these incredible musicians were there, and I just felt a little insecure, like, wow, I just got plopped into a new scene, and uh, I kind of have to prove myself or something, that kind of thing. And so it felt kind of tough, and I realized that I had been sort of just going through and taking gigs and working, but this suddenly felt like a group of musicians who were really serious and really different, had in different scenes and playing different music. And Wynton wasn't in the band like he is now. But when we did the concert, he came out, soloed on a couple things, and kind of disappeared off the stage. And I remember seeing him backstage, like, hey, man, and he was like, all right, he was kind of like a little chilly to me. And that wasn't because he was cold. It was just because of my
Yeah, yeah.
him. And so, he plays it off a little bit like, yeah, man, and so I remember that. And then, um, because of some other subbing at Jazz at Lincoln Center, I ended up on this gig with Marcus Roberts, the piano.
Mm, really? Okay.
Project of Gershwin's music, Rhapsody in Blue and Yamakra. And I think I Got Rhythm, different things by Gershwin. And I was just going to be in the section, but he had a problem with the clarinet player to play the Rhapsody in Blue solo. And so that chair, like we would rehearse for this, and the chair was just empty. And I just said to the conductor, I said, hey, I mean, if he wants to just hear it, and I can play it on clarinet for now or whatever. He goes, fine. So I brought my clarinet the next day and played it. Then Marcus Roberts was like, hey man, you're doing this. You're going to do the recording. And he was like, he gave me some instructions of what he wanted. He didn't want it to sound like a classical cap, but more bluesy and like that. It's like, okay, cool. So I did it. He was happy with it. We got into the studio and recorded it. And Wynton came in with Stanley Crouch and sat and
Mm,
listened to the recording session. Now I had met Wynton, but he didn't really remember meeting me or anything about me. So he came up to me, and goes, man, you sound good, man. I don't know about you. What are you doing, man? I said, well, just out here, And he goes, hey, come out and do some gigs with my band. So I went out with his 10-piece band and we did a little bit of
mm,
tour and a recording of his. And that's how I first got involved with Wynton. And that was probably at least 2 years, 3 years before the position opened up in the band. So then when it did, Sherman Irby actually left the band to go play with Roy Hargrove. They asked me to come in and play. And
okay.
it was like, well, I can't be not playing the alto, when this opportunity to play with these
Absolutely. Yeah.
musicians and comes up. So I got back into playing alto in 1998, and I think people still associate me as an alto player mostly because of these two
Yeah.
bands that I've been with for so many years. Between them, it's like 30, 37 years of playing alto. So yeah, I'm an alto player. What can I say?
Amazing,
This is
man. Beautiful. Wow. A beautiful
mm.
story. Wow. Amazing. Ted, not to take too much of your time, but like, I also wanted to ask you just one question. Like, your Freddie Hubbard experience, how was that like? And uh,
Oh my God, how do you
how,
even know about that?
oh, that record. It's like so many players that I know. And
Yeah,
how did
like
you end up
Freddie
on that one?
Hubbard
Actually, I mean,
and
it's a funny record. I'll put it like that.
yeah.
But still, like, you know, how did you end up there and playing with him, or just that session, or?
Well, so I can claim that I played with and worked with Freddie Hubbard. I did not meet Freddie Hubbard.
Ah, wow, really? Okay, shit. Oh man, okay.
I'll just, yeah, I'm on Freddie's record, man. I think it might be his last record.
Yeah, I think it is last
I
year.
think it is. Um, uh, uh, Dave, the trumpet player who put that together, David Weiss.
David Weiss, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he called me. He says, "Hey, this we're gonna do this project. It's like these instruments, flute. He knew as a doubler and all that, and arrangements. And could you come and play on it?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And I remember Craig Handy was on it, and I think Mulgrew Miller, some other people that
Yeah,
were
yeah,
like
like
big
killing
heroes
band
of mine.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and we rehearsed and we went in the studio, and then it was apparent that Freddie's chops were not. He had some trouble with
Yep.
his chops, so he couldn't do the record. But we had already set up these 2 days in the studio. So Jim Rotundi, great trumpet player,
Sure, I know Jim. Yeah.
who also very influenced by Freddie, or at least knows his language, came in. They put him in a booth, isolated him, and he played the solos all through the record. And everybody, the rhythm section, everybody responded to Jim Rotundi and how he played. So Freddie came in later and overdubbed all of his
I
solos.
didn't know that, man. Wow, really?
Yeah, well, that's a secret between you and me. I
Yeah,
won't.
yeah, and wow.
I don't know how well known that is, but it was an interesting experience. And so, therefore, I did not meet Freddie, and that's too bad.
Incredible, man.
He's one of my
Incredible.
favorites.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's good. It's nice for Jim because Jim passed away, I think, last year or 2 years ago. So
I
it's good
know.
that we give him the
Yeah, if you don't know his music,
appreciation. Yeah, he was a great
people
player.
know him, and
Yeah, yeah,
especially in the scenes, but like he was one of the most fantastic
absolutely.
trumpet players. And when you heard him play live, it was like one of the heavy, one of the cats, one of the
Yeah, yeah.
heavy cats. So
Absolutely. Interesting,
yeah,
man. Well,
there's so
okay.
many musicians like that. I mean, I think of him like a Tom Harrell or
Oh yeah.
some, and I'm going to work with Tom Harrell this next week, so I'm really
Really?
excited.
Oh, what's the occasion? I mean, that was my kind of last question. What's still in the schedule for you for this year? So, and but there you go. You.
So I this is exciting. Now uh, so Jazz at Lincoln Center. I'm no longer in the orchestra, but I still am associated with them and do things and do education things and
Mhm.
occasional concerts and stuff. And they asked me to be the musical director for this concert next weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And it's the theme is music of the 1970s. So they just allowed me to pick all the music and the guest artists. And so my my two first thoughts were Hubert Laws
Mm.
and Tom Harrell. And Hubert Laws because when I was, man, I got to show you this. So when I was 15, like I wore I wore out this record in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
beginning.
okay, yeah, yeah, the CTI, yeah, yeah, those,
PTI.
yeah, 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 sure, I know that
I
one.
played that and this one, Morning Star,
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah,
right?
sure.
All right. So and I was getting into jazz flute at the time, so I played those all the time. So they asked Hubert Laws if he would do the concert, and he said yes. So I
Mm.
was thrilled. So I started to orchestrate some stuff for the band to feature him, and then he canceled.
Oh, okay.
So Charles McPherson, another one of my heroes, is going to play the concert.
Oh, fantastic.
But I did ask Tom Harrell, and he said yes. And so we're going to play one. This is one of my favorite records from the 70s. Uh, Horace Silver's Silver and
Yeah.
Brass, and Bob, Bob Berg and Tom Harrell are the horn players. And I used to play along with this record like I played along with this record for hours and hours and hours. So I know Tom's solo by heart.
Mm.
So he's coming in and he's going to play with us. And he and
Beautiful.
Charles will play together in one tune, but each of them will have like two feature numbers. Marcus Printup is doing an arrangement of one of Tom's originals from the 70s. And so all the music will be stuff that was recorded or composed in the 70s. We're
Mm.
going to have some music by Quincy Jones, Stevie Wonder, Gil Scott-Heron.
Mm.
I don't know if Gil
Sure,
Scott-Heron,
sure,
but
sure, of course, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but I don't know how people. I mean, he passed away fairly recently, but he was really the original rapper. And his song called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" was really
Mm.
kind of controversial and very very cool. So we're going to do an arrangement of that. Chick Corea, Weather Report, Toshiko Akiyoshi.
Sure.
So a lot of people who've really uh, McCoy Tyner, a lot of people who in the 70s created really amazing body work are going to be featured musically with their compositions and
Fantastic.
these great artists, Charles McPherson and Tom Harrell. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, I love Tom's man. Tom's music. He's such a composer and such a
Amazing.
trumpet player, obviously. But just
Yeah,
his compositions, like everyone is like raving about his
yeah,
compositions. I did this talk with Jonathan Blake, and he's been playing with Tom like for 20 years, and he's just like, man, Tom, he's like, the composer, and it's true. It's like amazing.
yeah,
Such an underrated player and composer, actually. So,
yeah.
but yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, in a way, underrated. I mean, because I mean, I think everybody knows about him, but um,
I mean, the jazz circles, we know it, but like if
exactly.
you go wider, I think the jazz audience, they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Depends on how wide you go, because then you start.
exactly, exactly,
Then it's
exactly.
like the only person anyone who knows who's a trumpet player is Louis Armstrong. If you go wide enough.
That's true, actually. That's true.
But,
That's
yeah,
true.
no, it's so
Beautiful.
true. I mean, this is the thing is like that this jazz world is and it's such an incredible community, and
Yeah.
we are lucky when people outside of our community know who we are or love the music or
Yep.
support it. But the support is really within the community, and people like Tom, uh, like just that Marcus Printup is doing the arrangement for him, and Marcus is such a huge fan, and this is such a beautiful moment for a lot of people to
Mm,
come together, and it's just a reminder too that to go ahead and appreciate the people who are still alive and still playing because they like Jim Rotundi or
absolutely.
whoever you're on this planet for a certain amount of time, and let's support and go out and talk about and listen to and embrace all the people we love in this music because it is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you finished the solo nicely here. That's like I'll leave you be here. But otherwise, do you have any plans of coming to Europe also, or with something, or
Not now.
okay,
I have nothing in my book at all, and I I'm just about to sign the contract, but I'm going to start teaching at Temple University. So that's a real shift for me because
sure,
it's basically a full-time position. I mean, it's Dick Oates has been there for 20 years and he's leaving. And so I'm basically taking his place. So I'll be teaching composition class and working with a lot of students and stuff like that. I'm really looking forward to that. It's kind of a new,
new
I've been
chapter.
teaching, but never that committed to one organization. So it's going to be different and I'm really looking forward to it. So if
Beautiful.
you're a student and you're looking for a place to come and study, come to Temple. I'm telling you, man, they have an incredible staff and the school and everything about like I've gone there a couple of times now to check it out and play, and I've played with some of the faculty and there's just incredible school. So,
That's,
come on.
that's it. Yeah, we'll cut this out and I'll send just this to you. So like, but cool,
Okay.
man. That I'll leave you a nice afternoon in New York. But thanks so much for sharing some of these
Thanks for
thoughts. I
having me.
really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
man. All right.
Nice to hear you. And if you're gonna be in Europe, drop me a line. Well, let's get
Okay,
together
totally.
for a glass of wine or
Absolutely,
something.
man. Thanks for having me.
Cool.
Great to talk
Thank
to
you
you.
too. You too.
Dr. Jazz.